Thank you, Dr. Tuxen. Almost 9 years ago, I woke up with excruciating back pain. I'd been having a lot of back pain over the preceding months, but I chalked it up to physical activity and, of course, advancing age. On this particular morning, however, it was worse, a lot worse. Standing in my room alone, I suddenly collapsed on the floor and I couldn't move. I was in and out of the hospital for the next several days. I saw sports doctors, specialists, ER docs. Finally, I lay on a gurney in an emergency room and I learned my diagnosis, a crushed T11 vertebra. That's when a man came in and said, "Hi, I'm Paul Thamby. I'm the oncologist on duty." I said, "Dr. Thamby, I think you're in the wrong room. I have a sore back." And he said, "No, I don't think I do. Cancer broke my back. I have multiple myeloma. It also broke my ribs, 8 holes in my pelvis, arm bones, skull. The fact that I'm standing here today is really a miracle of modern medicine. Unfortunately, I'm never going to be a cancer survivor. Multiple myeloma is incurable, but with medication, I can keep it at bay for some period of time. So every 2 weeks, I spend several hours at a clinic getting an infusion of drugs that are currently priced at more than $600,000 a year. I'm a very lucky man. I'm lucky these treatments are keeping me alive right now. I'm lucky I can afford the costs of my treatments. But my journey as a cancer patient taught me one simple fact, and that is drugs don't work if people can't afford them. Now, standing here and telling you all that drugs are too expensive feels a little absurd. There isn't a person in this room who doesn't know that there's an issue about drugs costing too much. We would probably get different answers as to why the reps from drug companies would blame PBMs, insurers, and hospitals. The hospitals and PBMs and insurers would blame the drug companies. Me, I'm an equal opportunity blamer. The whole system's broken. And I seem to be in the majority. A recent poll found that 80% of Americans say Congress's top priority should be action to lower drug prices. And it makes sense, because my story is far from unique. When I first got sick, my doctors put me on a drug called Revlimid, a 50-year-old drug that was invented in the 1950s, so it's 60-some years old, a derivative of that drug. I was able to pay for my prescription at $250 out of pocket every 4 weeks, but for Medicare beneficiaries, on Revlimid, the median out-of-pocket cost can run to $15,000 a year. As Lee pointed out, half of the median annual income. Drug prices are bankrupting some of us, and when people begin rationing their drugs or skipping them altogether, these prices literally can kill us. That's why we started Patients for Affordable Drugs, to raise the voice of patients and help them tell their stories. We have nearly 20,000 stories on our website. Tomorrow, we'll participate in a hearing before the OGR committee in the House with patients so more people can tell their stories. And we know we can lower prices because despite what drug companies tell us, we don't have to have sky-high drug prices to have innovation. Now, their argument seems to make sense on its face. Research and development are expensive. But the risk drug companies cite is not the reality. Multiple studies show there is no correlation between the cost of innovation and the price of a drug. The $2.6 billion cost that Big Pharma often cites for a new drug is based on a study we talked about yesterday from Tufts that the companies paid for, supplied the data for, and won't reveal the underlying data for, citing trade secrets. Other independent studies show that the cost of developing a new drug is far less than that. In addition, the money invested in research isn't coming from the companies alone. It's why we're here. It's coming from taxpayers, from you and me. U.S. taxpayers foot an enormous portion of the bill for high-risk, early science leading to new drugs. We talked yesterday about the data showing that every drug approved by the FDA from 2010 to 2016 has some element of science paid for by taxpayers through the NIH. As we know, NIH is the single biggest source of biomedical research in the world at $39 billion this year. Based on data from a survey of pharma's own member companies, 1 out of every $3 spent on research comes from American taxpayers. And even more tax-advantaged dollars flow through research foundations, academic medical centers, patient organizations, R&D tax credits, all courtesy of U.S. taxpayers. At its Senate hearing recently, all 7 CEOs who were there from major drug corporations admitted that they benefit from the taxpayer investment in research, and increasingly, taxpayers are actually funding drug development. Let me give you an example. There's a coming cure for sickle cell that Francis Collins is excited about. He went on 60 Minutes a couple of months ago to tout it with great pride, saying it's coming from NIH, and here are the facts. American taxpayers invested $300 million into one specific upcoming treatment called lentoglobin BB305. Right now, clinical trials are being run on that drug inside the walls of NIH. NIH is even recruiting patients to participate in the clinical trials. Step back from this one specific sickle cell drug, and we know that NIH is spending $100 million per year in general to find a cure for sickle cell. How? Because NIH announced it publicly. Now, this could be a cure for a disease that is devastating and disproportionately impacts marginalized communities. Currently, these curative treatments are being priced at somewhere between $500,000 and $2 million for a treatment. Are we going to have a price set for this sickle cell cure at $1 million benchmark for a drug developed with taxpayer support? Well, with 100,000 sickle cell patients in the United States of America, that would cost us all $100 billion. Now, as a blood cancer patient, I also care deeply about the prospects for CAR T, so let me take a minute there. Taxpayers invested $200 million in basic CAR T research through the NIH. Even the seminal paper published in August 2011 by Dr. Carl June and his team at UPenn reporting that CAR T actually worked in human beings was paid for in part by taxpayers through the NIH. Then, in 2012, Novartis swooped in, acquired the global rights in perpetuity to all the CARs developed at UPenn. And taxpayers did not just pay for basic science. Dr. June said, and I'm quoting, "When Novartis licensed CAR T from us in 2012, it was ready to go. They were in catch-up mode compared to where the clinical trials were. All the trials had happened in academia. The price for Kymriah, the drug, $475,000 a dose." Or we could talk about Yescarta, the kite drug sold to Gilead with 2 NIH patents. SEC filings showed $321 million in R&D by Kite prior to the sale, but the acquisition price was $11.9 billion, so we're paying not at all on the basis of the cost of research or the cost to develop. We're paying based on the anticipated future returns coming from sky-high prices. If history is any guide, we know that drug corporations are going to continue to charge as much as they can unless we do something to stop them. They're profit-maximizing entities. And with 400 trials underway right now for these kinds of gene therapies, we can't possibly afford to pay just whatever price these drug companies demand. Here's the bottom line. It may have been okay for NIH to wash its hands of price when drugs were $200 or $2,000, but at $2 million a dose for Zolgensma, it's time to reconsider our approach, and that's why we're all here. It's not the 1990s, and drug companies rely on the huge portion of basic research that taxpayers are providing. It's time we address price, because if we don't, the NIH will continue to fuel a drug pricing crisis. Now, drug companies are going to point out all the savings to healthcare system when they set high prices. It's cheaper than existing alternatives, but frequently those alternatives were already overpriced, so that's a bad benchmark. And then they say, look at all the healthcare dollars that will be saved. Look at all the productive years of life that will be gained. They often fail to mention that many of the patients would have died and not required care at all. That may happen to me. But regardless, we don't pay anyone else in our healthcare system that way. We don't pay the surgeon who repairs a congenital defect of birth that way. We didn't price the polio vaccine I got when I was 6 years old based on all the kids who were not going to have to live in iron lugs. Yes, drug companies should make money when they create truly innovative drugs, but we are way out of balance and it's costing us all in bankruptcies, health outcomes, and lives. Dr. Kesselheim is going to spend a lot of time talking about specific solutions. I just want to touch on a couple of things generally. First, NIH scientists don't want to deal with prices. We get that. So Congress should establish an entity to do it for them. 2, we should address the price at the point of technology transfer, not after the fact. Drug companies need predictability, but right now pharmaceutical companies have unchecked power to turn taxpayer investment into unrestrained profits, and we have to make sure that we restore balance. There are a variety of approaches we could take to establish a framework for pricing that will strike the right balance to protect innovation and maximize public health. One was discussed today, for example, using a cost-effectiveness threshold. We also think NIH should reinstate the reasonable pricing provision in every single CRADA, an exclusive licensing agreement that it strikes. As Dr. Saprawari pointed out yesterday, standard CRADAs did not explode in number after NIH abandoned reasonable pricing in 1995. In fact, the truth is, if you look at all the data, the standard CRADAs have gone up by about 46% in number, while the budget of NIH has gone up 400%. So this whole story about chilling cooperation doesn't bear out when you actually look at the facts. Right now, if you're a patient like me, drug companies want us to be asking only one fundamental question, and that is, what are we willing to pay to save a life? And that's easy. When it's your child's lungs on the line, when it's your wife's diabetes, your cancer, the answer is anything. We'll empty our 401ks, we'll mortgage our houses. But that's the wrong question. We should be asking, what is the right amount of money that drug companies should make on these drugs, especially drugs developed with taxpayer support for the science? How much can we as a society keep sending drug companies in the face of so many other healthcare and societal needs? Surely that number cannot be unlimited. Recently I met a woman named Ruth Reinhardt. Ruth has primary immune deficiency and her treatments cost around $52,000 a year. She and her husband were getting by, but when he became sick and lost his job, they had to file for bankruptcy. They lost their home. Today, Ruth and her husband are in debt, living paycheck to paycheck, and in her late 60s, she's back at work. Now, I feel incredibly grateful to spend my retirement tackling this issue so that people like Ruth can one day enjoy theirs, because no one should have to choose between their health and their home. Yep, we're up against daunting odds. We heard them expressed in this room in the past day or so. We'll never have the money that pharma spends. We'll never have the sheer number of lobbyists they do. But we have other tools. Righteous anger, the power of millions of people who are fed up in this country, and political barriers that literally are cracking under the weight of a system that cannot hold. Now, the reason my cancer is incurable is that it mutates and finds its way around drugs. In fact, I'm waiting right now, today, on test results from blood drawn 2 days ago. Reason, I'm failing on my current drug combination, and I'll soon be triple refractory. For those of you who are physicians in this room, you know that means that 3 of the main drugs that treat my disease are no longer working. So when I say I care about drug innovation, I mean that for me, it's a matter of life and death. But we have to rebalance the need for profits with public health. Now, cancer broke my back, but it stiffened my spine. I'm not a survivor, but I am a fighter, and we're going to continue this fight because it's the fight of my life. Thanks for listening.